Over the course of the story of Joseph and his brothers, which closes the book of Bereshit, of Genesis, we looked at the way that Yosef and Yehudah dealt with the circumstances of their birth, the circumstances of their family, the traumas that came with that, the encouragement that came with that, and how it is that they all developed in terms of their own identity, their place within the family, and their relationship with each other. The book of Bereshit ends with Yosef dying and being simply placed in a coffin in Egypt. We don't really know much more about what happens after that. There is a 60-year gap between the death of Joseph and the birth of Moses at the opening of the second book of the Torah, which we will be reading this week, Sefer Shemot, beginning with Parashat Shemot of the same name, simply meaning the book and parasha of names. Which is ironic because the parasha of Shemot opens with the names of the children of Israel being listed, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehudah, and so on. But after that, there are really no names that are mentioned. As a matter of fact, the parasha goes out of its way not to mention names until finally Moses is named, and we see how things develop from there. The brothers come into their own by the end of the book of Bereshit. And although their differences are not all reconciled, that they certainly stand their ground in terms of how they feel about the ideas and the approach and vision that they have for the family, they nonetheless agree to disagree and work together. And they provide a scaffolding and infrastructure for the family to be able to develop. Yosef develops the actual infrastructure in terms of their placement in Egypt and how it is that they are going to live in that place. And Yehudah sets up the entire family structure, as he does so by instruction of his father Yaakov. Yaakov blesses all of them, dies, Yosef dies. And the book of Shemot opens saying, Vayamot Yosef bechol echav bechol adorahu. Yosef, his brothers, the entire generation that came down from Canaan with Yaakov dies. Now, what is happening with the descendants that are there? We don't really know what's happening with them on an individual level, but we know that on a general level, their numbers are tremendously plentiful. They are having a great number of children. Ubnei Yisrael paru vayishretzu vayirbu vayatzmu b'meod meod v'timale ha'aretz otam. The children of Israel are abundant, they are flourishing, their numbers are increasing exceedingly, and the land is filled with them. And it is so much so that it catches the eye of Paro. So while the progenitors, right, the fathers of the tribes, have indeed established themselves as clear, unique identities, and each one is kind of outlined and recognized, highlighted by Yaakov Avinu in his blessings to them, this somehow dissipates by the time that the opening of the book of Shemot occurs. So 60 years later, what we have is a multitude of number, but we do not have a very clear sense of who the personalities are here, who are the individuals. There is one aspect of the house of Israel that stands out at the beginning of this book, and that is the family or the house of Levy. So whereas Yehudah and Yosef, Ephraim and Menashe essentially, are quite prominent by the end of the book of Bereshit, the brother and the household that emerges in the forefront here is the house of Levi, which is very interesting because Yaakov Abinu gave quite a harsh beracha to Levi. I mean, he gave the beracha jointly to Shimon and Levi, saw them essentially as one, and said, they are too violent for me. I don't want to have anything to do with their gatherings. I mean, it ends there. There's like no silver lining. He just simply says, you guys are tough. I don't really know how to deal with you, and leaves it that way. Levi seems to take that and use the elements that his father recognizes in him, right? These very strong, courageous, standing up elements, and channels it as best he can into positive assertion, to fight for the right things, to stand for the right things. And that is firstly evident at the opening of the parasha, in which it says, no names, Ish mi bet Levi, a man from the house of Levi, marries a bat Levi, a daughter of the house of Levi. And they have 3 children, namely Miriam, Aaron, and Moses, Miriam, Harun, and Moshe. Now, of course, the story of Moshe's birth is fraught because his birth occurs during the time that Paro has decreed that all male children are to be murdered by throwing them into the Nile. So Moses is born during this time, and therefore he's in danger. He is hidden by his mother until she can't hide him anymore. He's raised eventually by the daughter of Paro, right? And I refer you to the synopsis that I've done on the parasha to go through the story in broad strokes. But ultimately, Moshe, as a member of the house of Levy, stands out. And he is the only one, really, that stands out in the story at this point, because the rest of his brethren, all of Bnei Israel, are a large multitude of people that have now become enslaved and oppressed by Paro in order to be able to control their potential power in the land of Egypt. But individual identities, we don't yet know. In the oppression, there is a collapse of identity. This is interesting because it's something that Viktor Frankl writes about in Man's Search for Meaning as he quotes Sigmund Freud. And he quotes Sigmund Freud saying that in suffering, the individuality of human beings blurs, right? It dissipates. And that the collective of humanity becomes single-minded. And so, for example, if people are hungry and there is hunger, the whole of the people essentially has one thing on their mind, and that is finding food to deal with the hunger or to simply recognize the hunger. And so there is not a tremendous amount of room for the individual expression of an individual to come out. And this is reminiscent also in terms of how Maslow presents his hierarchy, right? That at the very lower platform and lower level of the hierarchy, there are basic human needs. And when those basic human needs are not met, there is no higher level of development and expression that really has any room to develop and flourish. All that matters is, do I have shelter? Do I have food? Do I have clean lodgings, and so on and so forth, that allows me to simply be able to be a physical human being in the world? And it's not until those needs are met that higher levels of unique individual expression ultimately have any room to come out. So Freud has an important point there. Maslow has an important point there. But Frankl also points another thing out. And he says, look, we are not tabula rasa. Right? Even in our core element as human beings, when we are at our most primal state, as a result of not having the basic needs to be able to be whole, flourishing human beings, the core individual nature of humans is still retained. And he talks about the concentration camps. And he says that it was in that state, and he says, thankfully Freud didn't end up having to see the inside of concentration camps, but I did, he said. And what he says is it was in that space that swine and saint was recognized. How people dealt with the hardship, oppression, and suffering was not homogeneous. It was not one across the board. There were different people that dealt with it different ways. There were the swine that stole, that cursed their days, that simply really deteriorated into dark people. And there were the saints that even with their last morsel of bread were prepared to share, that were not going to give up their kind eye and their kind disposition in all of the difficulty, even in those circumstances. And that's something that Frankl recognizes. And interestingly, we see this in the story of Shemot, of Exodus, during this period of time. Because although there is a great deal of suffering, and yes, there is a unity of the people, there is a unity of the people in calling out to God from the avodah, it says, right? They call out to God from the slavery, from the work, from the lack of freedom to be their fullest selves, which is a legacy of Abraham Avinu that is embedded in the heart of the people of Israel. They cry out to God collectively in this regard. On that level, they are all the same. And the individual elements really don't stand out very much. It's just about getting to freedom. But even in that state, there are the different approaches, right? So you have the parents of Moshe Rabbeinu, who are highlighted in the parasha. that are strongly standing out and saying, you know something, it might be bleak out there, it might be horrible out there, but we're going to have children. And as far as the Midrash is concerned, it wasn't even them. It was Miriam, their daughter, because the people had essentially refrained from having children because they said, essentially, what are we bringing our children into? This horrible, horrible, oppressive situation. To which Miriam said, this is based on the Midrash and brought in Rashi, your decree is worse than Pharaoh's. Pharaoh just decreed on the boys. You're decreeing boys and girls, meaning anything that, any birth, right? You're just shutting down. And so she encourages them to keep at it, to engage in life and cultivating life, to keep doing so, even in the face of the darkness. And that was not ubiquitous. It wasn't through and through. I mean, we know later on that there are people in the story that really are not on top-notch individuals like Datan and Abiram, but they come a little bit later. So both aspects are expressed over here, both Freud's and Frankel's. And perhaps it is that courageous, kindly, life-affirming aspect of Moshe's parents that merit them having Moshe, the one who ultimately liberates Bnei Israel from this situation and gives them the opportunity to be able to be everything that they were created to be. So he is the one free individual in this story, raised as a prince of Egypt. And in his freedom, he does what the grandchild of Abraham Avinu would do, what we would expect him to do. And that is that he pursues truth. He's interested in what is right and what is true, and he dedicates himself to doing so. Harambam writes in the Moreh Nebuchim that Moshe Rabbeinu did this from the time that he reached puberty, that he was driven to not only act to be able to help people, to support his brethren, to be able to strengthen humanity around him, but to know the truth and to fight for the truth. And so, yes, I mean, he ends up murdering someone in his early years because he sees them wrongly oppressing one of the members of Israel. And he ends up having to run away as a result of this. But there is a very unique aspect of the parasha in which Moshe's attention to what is real is highlighted. And that is when he sees this strange illusion, right? The strange, and by illusion, I don't mean that it wasn't happening, but there was this odd thing going on where it looks like there's fire that is engulfing a bush, but it's not consuming. The fire is not consuming the bush. And so Moses sees this. And the pasuk goes out of its way to say, it's not just that Moses sees it, Moses wants to examine it. He wants to understand what it is that he's seeing because he knows that it's not normal. He doesn't just take it as some strange miracle and drop to the floor and praise God. Right? He says, Asura na ve'er'eh et hamareh gadol hazeh. I want to get closer to see this unbelievable sight. Now, the amazing thing is the pasuk says, God sees that he does this. And only then does God begin speaking to him. Vayar Adonai kisar lirot. God saw that he went close to try and examine this. And I think that that's very telling. Because what it says is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu found favor in the fact that Moses was interested in understanding the illusion or the optical illusion, the strange vision that he saw that was not normal, and that he wanted to unpack it, that he wanted to kind of get to the bottom of it. And that is favored by God. And it's there where God says, Moses, I'm the God of your father, Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov, and I have a very important job for you. So that is who Moses is. And he doesn't stop with that for his entire life. And we meet up with him essentially in the parasha again when he's 80 years old. And the parasha goes out of its way to tell us that he's already lived 2/3 of his life by the time that he is given this tremendous job of actually speaking to Paro and liberating the people of Israel from slavery in Egypt. But he is also one of the only people, and in my opinion, he is singular in all of Tanakh in the way that his personal development is expressed with such a massive shift and consistent move to higher and higher levels of achievement than any other identity, any other character, any other individual in the Torah. is Moshe Rabbeinu. Nobody comes close. And we only see the great majority of his life and development of the last third of his life, from 80 to 120 years old, right? So the last 40 years. And he goes through such a tremendous development. And this is kind of a peek into how Moshe thought, how he dealt with things, right? We don't have a huge amount of insight into how Moshe thought internally here and there, right? We simply see how it is that he acts and responds with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But here in Shemot, we see the wiring a bit, right? We see how it is that he responds to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives him this job, and he argues back and forth. He's the only person that argues with God this way. I mean, Abraham's entire dialogue with God in Sodom is more just to try and understand what it is that God is doing, to be able to get an idea of, well, I mean, if this were the state of Sodom, would you do this? And if this were the state of Sodom, would you do this? And God kind of clarifies for him, I do it if this was the state, right? If this was the case, then this is what I do. Moshe is not doing that. Moshe is saying, I disagree with what it is that you're doing. I don't think I'm the right guy. I'm not even sure that this is the right idea. And that is absolutely new. It is a legacy that later Nebi'im take, right? With Moshe ultimately becoming, as Harambam calls him, Rabban shel kol Nebi'im, the master of all prophets. So the prophets of Israel end up taking their cue from Moses, and indeed arguing. But Moses is the first one to do it, because he is absolutely and utterly dedicated to truth, and he does not simply say, just because you say, God, I'm going to simply bow my head and take it. I am still a human being with a mind that you've created, that works in the way that you've created, and I need to be able to get this stuff. I have to kind of have a way of understanding it. And I'm going to push back from my own human perspective if I don't actually see it that way. Because if this is a relationship, Rabbono Shalom, if this is a covenant, and it is the covenant of Abraham Avinu that we are working on over here, well then I'm going to be a full-fledged player. And if I'm going to be a full-fledged player, it means that I need to also understand, and at least from my part, recognize what it is that's happening here. Now, sometimes you overstep, and as a matter of fact, God does get angry at Moses by the end of the dialogue at the burning bush because of it. But Moses is a free man. He is the only free man in the story at this point, and he is living his freedom fully. He is working on becoming all that he can become, even though at this point he says about himself, I'm inadequate. I'm not a man of many words. I don't know how to speak very well. I don't think that I'm the right person to be able to stand up in front of Pharaoh, to which God says, look, I'll help you. You have growth, right? I mean, there's things that you can do. It's in you if you want to do it. And of course, we do know that later on, Moshe's capacity to speak is in full force. He's the one who speaks the entire book of Devarim, right? Literally the book of Moses' words, which is essentially what Sefer Devarim is. So this is who the free man is. This is Moshe being and exercising everything that he can as a free man. And that is juxtaposed against all of his brethren. His brethren are not free. His brethren have no latitude in order to be able to do any of this. They are at the bottom of Maslow's pyramid. They are barely getting by as human beings in the world with the very bare necessities that they need. And that is the juxtaposition. And so the free man Moses, who grew up as a prince of Egypt, who uses all of his latitude, even to stand before God and argue back and forth in order to be able to be a full player in the world and the covenant of Abraham, he's the one that is to get out, to liberate the people so that they can do the same. He's the one that is to set an example for them. He is the one that needs to show them the way. And so he is set up that way in this parasha. And he is forever our example of how it is that we should approach a whole, full, righteous life. It's the reason why Harambam brings Moshe as the example of being a tzaddik, not being a prophet, but being a tzaddik. Right? He says everyone has the capacity to be a tzaddik like Moshe Rabbeinu. He writes so in Hilchot Teshuvah. Moses is the bar. Moses is the bar for the Hakamim in the Talmud. Right? When they say that the ability to be able to fear God, to be able to rise and hold ourselves to our highest levels, is is all, he's the one that is presented by the Hachamim in the Talmud as saying, Ma Adonai Elohecha shoel meimach. I mean, what does God ask of you? And Moses proceeds to explain to the children of Israel what meeting their full potential looks like, right? What is the template that they are to follow to meet their full potential? To love God, to fear God, to walk in his ways, right? To dedicate themselves to engaging in full relationship with him and service. And when he says, Ma Adonai Elohecha shoel meimach, the Hachamim say, is that such a small thing? And they say, well, to Moshe it was. And he sets the bar, and if we could see him do it, if we could see Moses do it, then we have something that we can strive towards. So that is how Moses is set in the parasha from the very beginning. On the other hand, though, you have the unnamed multitudes of Israel that are suffering and that are oppressed and that are absolutely enslaved. And the question for them is, what did they do? Well, their domain is hope and faith. That is what they have. And that's something that even God says to Moses, you don't realize the level of hope and faithfulness that my people have, Moses. You don't even realize the level that they are ma'aminim b'nei ma'aminim, as the Hachamim put it. They are faithful people, children of faithful people, meaning of Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov. They don't have to understand everything. They don't have to know everything. Their heart is in the hope and faith that in the darkness, they know one thing that their grandfather Abraham taught them, and that is that God is with them in their plight, right? That the lifeline of God, right? That his presence runs through all things. What is the word in Hebrew for the line? Kav. Kav is a line. Kav is the root of tikva, which is the word for hope in Hebrew. And the people of Israel know deep in their hearts that if you are in the most severe plight, the most dire of circumstances, the light of God is there. It's accessible. It is a line that runs through the entirety of creation. And that is what we call tikvah. And you lean into that light. You reach for that line and hold to it. And that is something that our people have done en masse throughout all of our generations. But here is the first time. So when they are being oppressed by their work, when they are being pressed by their slavery, they call out to God. Right? Vayiza'aku. They call out. They sound alarm. Batal shavata min Elohim min avodah. And their cries rise to God from the work. And he responds. So that is what they hold during this period of time. And that is why the anthem of our people is tikvah. It's hope. Because we find ourselves in dark times a bit too much over our history. But it is the hope that has brought us through during those dark times. The knowledge that we are doing this together. Our lives as the children of Israel is a joint endeavor with God, always. And that we always have the ability to access the joint nature of the endeavor and call him in to our lives, to our experience, to our world. And that is something that Moshe Rabbeinu does ultimately as the people of Israel do leave Egypt and they do develop. Moshe uses that over and over again, which we will explore. That being the case, we are a people that not only live in hope, we are a people that do not give up on the full expression of our identity. We don't give up on it ever. And that is something that the nations of the world have feared. Because although we kind of take a back seat to history, and we are not the empires and we are not the massive powers of the world, we've never really been throughout our entire history, we nonetheless absolutely, quietly, and consistently build towards our greatest expression. And that's an aspect of anti-Semitism that calls out anti-Semitism, because the anti-Semites know, perhaps on a subconscious level, that the people of Israel don't go away. We may not be the leaders of the world. We may not be the most powerful of the world, but we don't go away. And that no matter what they come up with in terms of forms of government and power and strength and might and control and so on, they come and they go. They rise and they fall. And guess who's watching them the entire time? Who's always there? The Jews. And so for us, it is the top of the line, the highest bar, or bust. We either get to the top or die trying. And that's one of the reasons why the Hachamim say about us, which is interesting in terms of its juxtaposition to Moshe being the greatest Navi, the greatest prophet, which really what that means is that he has the closest relationship with God, is that all of Bnei Israel, all of the children of Israel, are either Nevi'im, they either are themselves prophets, or Bnei Nevi'im, or they are prophets in training. So for us, it is prophecy or bust. It is prophecy or die trying. And what that essentially means is that we reach as close as we can to truth, the truth of our own expression, the truth of our relationship with God in covenant that was started by Abraham Abinu. And that, incidentally, in the parasha is one of the reasons why there's a short interlude in the parasha where Moses is traveling to Egypt and he has not circumcised his son as a matter of urgency. He figures, I'll wait till I get to Egypt to do so. And God basically wants to kill Moses, right? He puts Moses in mortal danger as a result of this. And it's only when Zipporah kind of recognizes and circumcises the child that Moses is given leeway to be able to continue, right? He's given an entree to be able to continue the job. And people ask, what is going on over there? What's going on over there is that Moses does nothing that is not firmly and squarely based on the covenant of Abraham and God. And if you think that circumcising your child is something that you can take care of when you reach Egypt so that you're a little bit more settled, you still have priorities that are not yet straight. That needs to be taken care of. And so for us, for Bnei Israel, the collective people, for us it is prophecy or die trying. And what that means, it is the absolute commitment to truth, the truth of our own identity, of our own being, of our understanding of the world, and of our relationship with God, or die trying. And that is why Harambam writes at the very end of the Mishneh Torah, really this is the closing of the Mishneh Torah, that the only reason that we, the people of Israel, look for Mashiach, the only reason we, the people of Israel, recognize that our story is not complete, that we are staring into an unfinished story, even till this very day, is because we are just looking for one thing. We are looking for the freedom as written succinctly by Isaiah Berlin in his book Freedom. That freedom is being all that you are without impediment. The ability to be all you are without impediment. That Moshe lives out during these developments, starts out that way, seeking it, growing towards it, that the children of Israel cannot do in this scenario, that the Torah facilitates their ability to be able to do, that our history is essentially a story in us gradually, incrementally, consistently moving towards this, which we will examine as we go through the book, but that ultimately Harambam writes at the end of Hilchot Shofetim, Sefer Shofetim, Hilchot Melachim, the reason why we look forward to Mashiach, the reason why we still consider our story unfinished, that we are staring into an undisclosed future, is because we still have not come to a point in where we can simply be all that we are without impediment. Now, the state of Israel is a major move in that direction. And that is something that also incites anti-Semitism. Because to look at the people that don't go away, now finding themselves at home, now finding themselves gathered as a people again, sovereign in their own right to be able to manifest their own destiny, well, that is a formidable power, because it means that the people of Israel are being given the opportunity to be fully the people of Israel, which essentially is our story, which really is the openings of the book of Exodus, of the book of Shemot, and the parasha itself moves us in that direction. So it's like Mark Twain said, I would advise against all of the Jewish people gathered into the land, right, to be able to run their own show, so to speak. Why, he says it would be like the horse knowing its own strength. We'd never ride again. I mean, they're the most cunning minds. Well, that is indeed the people of Israel. But we're still working ourselves out. And sometimes the impediments are our own blockages, right? Things that we stand in our own way with. And ultimately, our story is a story of achieving greater and greater aspects of freedom. That's what Pesach is about. It's why it's our first festival in the year of festivals. And it's why ultimately we fight so strongly for our own freedom and for our ability to be able to be everything that God created us to be. We'll explore the details of this as we go through the parashiot of Shemot and we look at the story of Moshe Rabbeinu and the children of Israel. Shabbat Shalom.